Hello everyone out there, welcome to the International Yard Hunters Association. I am ScareRookie and today is Discussion Topic Tuesday. Hello everyone out there, and I want to thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this video and giving me an opportunity to spend some time with my hunt friends, each and every one of you out there. Thank you again for everything you do. I will never ever stop recognizing the hard work, time, and money that you put in for the sole purpose of just providing kids and families with a unique Halloween experience and creating memories that will last them a lifetime. And for that, that's special. It shows us who you are as a person, and I love you for it. If you are new to the site, or if you're new to watching a video, maybe this is your first time ever watching a video that we do, I do videos each week during Discussion Topic Tuesday, and we cover a variety of issues. Sometimes we talk about strategies, planning, prioritization, preparation, those type of things as far as getting things ready for your hunt. Some good tips, as far as how to get things better, tracking your setup times, your storage, taking things down, putting things up, keeping a journal of those type of things so you have that information, a year later, because you'll forget a lot of it. We talk about all types of paranormal type things. And when I say paranormal, that's not just ghosts. I consider anything that is outside the norm of what we consider normal life and understanding as being paranormal. So we cover topics of urban legends, of aliens, of cryptics, of ghosts, of monsters, of unexplained phenomenon, whatever it may be. We kind of talk a little bit of all of these subject matters. Now, you may ask yourself, what do those type of things have to do with yard hunting? They have everything to do with yard hunting. If you think about the monsters and the creatures, or the set designs, or the walkthrough themes that we might use for a yard hunt, where do you get those ideas from? We often get them from movies. We get them from books. We get them from art. We get them from urban legends or stories that have been passed down through the generations. And sometimes we get them from actual historical events or eyewitness accounts, or maybe it's something you experienced for yourself. But inspiration comes from all types of different areas, different subject matters, different approaches. Even Hollywood, the creators of a lot of the monsters that we use in our hunt themes, get their inspiration from other sources. Movies like The Blob is from an actual historical event that took place outside of Detroit in 1957. Nightmare on Elm Street is actually from a story that Wes Craven had read in the newspaper, where Laos men in the United States and in Asia were suddenly dying in the 1980s from a weird night terror event where many of them had claimed that they were being chased by a demon that was trying to kill them. So a lot of these stories come from actual events. The Battle of Los Angeles, that actually is a real life historical event that took place in the 1940s during World War II, where anti-aircraft fire from the coast of California outside of LA was firing on a UFO that was hovering above the city, witnessed by thousands. Thousands and thousands of rounds of anti-aircraft fire were shot at this thing with no damage being recorded. Airplanes were dispatched to the aircraft, and before they could even get to the aircraft, this UFO had vanished. An actual historical event that inspired that movie. And I'm sure it's inspired many other movies as well. So we cover all types of different topics and discussion points in these videos with the hope that it might inspire an idea, that it may give you an idea. At the very least, maybe just get you excited, kind of get you in the spooky mood of getting creative and adding to your hunt. And the ultimate goal of this, besides just providing some entertainment value, is to maybe inspire an idea that's just going to improve your overall product. And that's really what this is all about. So thank you for joining me if this is the first time you've ever watched this video. And thank you for those who have been continuously watching these videos. It means a lot to me. Now, today's discussion topic is one that I'm really fascinated by. Now, we have all heard the term time traveling. We have even seen movies about time traveling. Many of you have seen movies like Time Cop, or maybe you saw the movie The Time Machine, or Loopers. These are movies that depict people who have had the ability to travel through time. And the concept has always been an interesting one to people all over the world. But is it possible? Is time travel an actual possible thing? Well, to my knowledge, we've never actually been able to successfully travel back in time to where you would it'd be depicted in the movies, right? But according to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, it is scientifically possible. It is possible through bending time and space. Now, in the simplest form, his theory basically states that the closer you get to traveling the speed of light, the more time slows down, because it's all based on the individual's perspective of time. If they're traveling close to the speed of light, their perception of time is much slower than time to someone who's standing still. So the closer you get to the speed of light, the more time slows down. If you're traveling at the speed of light, time stops. If you're traveling faster than the speed of light, it is at that point where time starts going backwards, and therefore traveling back in time. Now, there have been examples of physical examples, actual evidence, proof that time travel, in the simplest of terms, is possible. They have shown that at certain parts, certain elevations, at certain speeds, and those type of things in our physical today's world will slow down time by a minute or two. So it is theoretically and physically been proven that time does slow down in certain situations. But does it slow down enough or go backwards enough to actually travel back in time? Well, we don't know that. But the idea of time travel is serious enough, has enough merit, that there are governments all over the world that are funding all types of research projects around discovering ways of traveling back in time. If you can travel back in time, it could be a lot of good things that come out of it, or it could be a lot of bad things. Who knows what the ramifications of traveling back in time are? It could be a situation where maybe you can travel back in time, but you're only able to observe it, right? You can't interact, you can't change, you can't do anything. You're like a ghost. Now that would be an awesome way to travel back in time, because then there's really no risk of interfering with the future or changing the future because you did something stupid and accidentally, kill somebody in an accident or something, and that person had a major impact on the future. So that would be the optimal way of traveling back in time, I would say, just from a experience standpoint. But for those who might have other plans, they would want to be able to interact with it. But there are governments that are funding that research today as we speak. But is there evidence of time travelers? What if someone or something has already figured it out? We talk about interdimensional beings. And many theories about interdimensional beings are that they have figured out how to travel through dimensions and through time. There's even discussions that UFOs, assuming they're extraterrestrial or possibly terrestrial, but they've figured out how to travel through time, because the amount of time it would take to travel from one universe to another is so immense that you would have to have the ability to travel at least at the speed of light. And even at the speed of light, you're still talking about time travel, traveling distances, I should say, that could take decades, even centuries. So that's not even feasible at the speed of light. But what if you had figured out a way to travel through time or through dimensions? Then you could actually skip across different planes of time and space very quickly. But I'm going to talk about a story today that is one of the most compelling examples of time travel I've ever read in my life. Now, there is claims that this was a hoax. And there's certain evidence that maybe it was a hoax. But if it was a hoax, it's one of the most elaborate hoaxes I've ever seen in my life. Now, I'm not saying this actually happened. I'm not saying that this guy is a time traveler. It's just a very interesting story, and one that I wanted to share with you. So with that, let's jump into it. A young man by the name of Sergei Ponomarenko, he's a young Ukrainian man, was walking in downtown Kiev, or walking in Kiev, I should say downtown, with his fiancée. They were kind of an out on the town type thing. They were dressed up, he had his camera, they were taking pictures, he's taking pictures of her and of the city and those type of things, and just having a grand old time. In 1958. Now, as he's walking with his girlfriend, he took a picture of his fiancée and, of the landscape and stuff. But as they were walking up in the sky, he noticed a strange craft. And it was a weird shaped craft, a bell-shaped craft. And he didn't know what it was. It was flying in a weird pattern, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Again, it's 1958. And so he took his camera and he took a picture of this craft so that he could research it later and, spend more time looking at it. It was at that point that Sergei found himself walking down the same streets in Kiev that he was on, but in 2006, in a split second. That was the last thing he remembered, was taking a picture of this craft. So he's obviously confused walking down the streets from 1958 to 2006. The cars look different. People are dressed differently. There's all kinds of technology that he's never seen before. He's totally confused. Now, this confused man walking around the streets of Kiev caught the attention of police officers and thought that he was acting very suspicious. So the two police officers approached him and asked him if everything's okay. And the young man was so confused and looking around, he had no idea. He asked the police officers what year it was. The police officers looked at each other and they're like, son, do you have any ID? And so Sergei pulled out his ID and he gave it to them. And they're talking to him, and he's a young man in his 20s to, early 30s. And they look at his ID, and they see the picture on the ID, and they look at him, and it matches him perfectly. But they're stunned at the ID they're looking at. Because the ID that he was looking at is a state-issued ID from the Soviet Union in the 1950s. It has the formal Soviet Union stamp on the ID that is used no longer. The Soviet Union hasn't existed for 15 years from the issue date of this ID, because Ukraine became a sovereign nation, its own country, in 1991 at the fall of the Soviet Union. And the other thing that kind of stood out to them is they're looking at this ID of this young man, and they're like, okay, 1958, there's a picture of him, he looks the same. The description of him is the same. It's got the official Soviet stamp on it. It's obviously 15 years old. And the other thing that jumped out at them is they're looking at this young man at the way he's dressed. He's dressed wearing attire that would have been found in 1958, in the 1950s in general. And the clothes were in perfect condition. They looked almost new. The other thing that stood out to them was the young man, Sergei, had a camera that was draped around his neck, and it was a camera from the style of the 1950s. And this camera looked brand new. So the police are absolutely confused about what is going on here. So the officers, he really wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just acting suspicious. And what threw them is when they asked him is that if everything's okay, his first question to them was, what time is it? What year is it? Well, that threw them off. But then all this other evidence is stacking up, and they really don't know what to do with this young man. So they think that maybe he's dealing with some mental issues. So the police decided what they're going to do is they're going to drop this young man off at a psychiatric clinic in Kiev, which they did. Now, the young man was examined by a doctor, and the doctor's name was Dr. Pablo Kerchevox. And Dr. Kerchevox recorded the session of him interviewing this young man on April 23rd, 2006. In the video, you can see where Sergey is asked what his name is, and he provides it. He says his name is actually Sergey Valentinovich Ponomarenko, and that he was born in Kiev on June 16, 1932. But the man in front of this doctor was not a 74-year-old man that he should have been based on his birthday. He looked to be about 30 or in his, upper 20s. When he asked what his age was, Sergey confirmed that he was 25 years old. Now, he told the doctor that the last thing he remembered was that he and his fiancée were walking down the road, down the sidewalk, whatever, and they were enjoying the beautiful day, kind of a night on the town, a day on the town. And they were taking pictures of the cityscape and of the streets, and he'd taken a picture of his fiancée. And while they were walking, he had noticed this craft flying in the sky, this bell-shaped craft, something he had never seen before, and it was flying in a very unusual way. And he was so confused by what he saw, he thought it best if he took a shot of it so he could go back and look at it later and get a better idea of maybe what it was. He said that he had taken a picture of the craft, and as soon as he had taken the picture of the craft, the next thing he knows, he's standing on the streets in today's date of 2006, and that's when he was approached by the police officers. He had no idea what was going on. The young man never claimed to be a time traveler. He never even claimed that what he saw was a UFO in the sense of we know it today, possibly alien. He just said it was a strange, unusual craft that was shaped like a bell. So he wasn't coming across as trying to sell a story. He was absolutely confused. He had no idea where he was, how he got there, or what the hell happened. So the doctor was a bit confused and obviously very skeptical of what he was hearing. He had taken a look at the young man's ID and verified the same thing the police officers had verified. But he was obviously doubting the sanity of this young man. And Sergey was very adamant. He's like, listen, I have proof. I've got photographs right here in this camera. I took these pictures. They're on this camera right now. The doctor had looked at the camera and again noticed that it was a camera from the 1950s. So what he thought he would do was he would go and have the film develop and prove to this young man that he was either delusional or confused or whatever, and try to convince him that, hey, obviously you're being affected by some type of delusional episode or breakdown or something. I had your film developed. There was nothing on here. Just try to convince the young man that he was delusional. So he took the camera to a developer to have the film developed. But surprisingly, the developer said, hey, we can't develop this film. And he's like, why not? And they're like, well, because there's no technology into the 21st century that we have right now that could develop this film. This film is very, very old. So that stuns the doctor. So the doctor does some research and he finds a person who specializes in antiquated photography. And he calls the gentleman up and he says, hey, listen, he goes, I have a camera here that has film in it. It is apparently film that can't be developed by today's standards. Could you take a look at it? And if possible, could you develop this film? So the man came down and picked up the camera and he looked at it and he's like, yeah, it's a camera from, the 1950s era. But yeah, I'll take a look at it and see what I can do. So he goes back and he takes the film out. And the man is absolutely stunned by what he finds. The type of film that was found in this camera is a film that was built, or that was made, I should say, not built, but made by a factory inside of Russia during the Soviet Union era. Now, this factory had closed in 1960 and hadn't produced any more film since then. Now, there was film already out on the marketplace, so you could buy that film up into the 1970s, but you could not buy that film in 2006. And even if you could, the film would be so degraded and falling apart because of the type of chemical compound that was used in that era to make that film. So it would be impossible to use that film. Yet, the film he's looking at is in perfect condition. It's like brand new. So he was able to develop the film and took it back to the doctor and gave it to him. And he is stunned. He has no explanation for how this film exists, how it was still in workable order, and how he was able to develop this film just because of the sheer science of the chemicals that were used by this film. It'd be no way it should work. And yet, this film was like in brand new condition. Pretty amazing. Now, when the doctor looked at the pictures that were developed from this film, he himself now is completely stunned. What does he find? He finds pictures of Kiev on this film from the 1950s. He finds a picture of the young man's fiance that was found on this film. And what's even more shocking is that he finds pictures of this craft. So, where are we right now? It's 2006. There's a young man by the name of Sergey in his mid to late 20s, dressed in clothes that are in perfect brand new condition from the 1950s, carrying a camera in brand new condition from the 1950s, with film inside of it that hasn't been made since 1960, that would not be possible to be used in 2006 in perfect condition, with photographs on it that were developed by a photograph expert, a film expert, given to the psychiatrist, and they were pictures of everything that Sergey said was on that camera. Now, you can imagine how absolutely stunned and confused now the doctor is as far as what is going on here. So, again, they did some additional investigation, and they talked with Sergey again on video on April 25th, 2006. And doctors showing him the photographs. And Sergey's like, yeah, there it is. I told you that's exactly what happened. And Sergey says, all I remember was just walking with my fiance taking pictures. I saw this craft, didn't know what it was. I simply took a picture. And the next thing I know, I'm here in 2006. That's all I know. I don't understand what that object was. I've never seen anything like that. And at the same moment I took the picture, I end up here in this year. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know what's going on. When the two men finished speaking, there is security surveillance videos, tapes, that show Sergey being escorted into a room within the clinic. He is never seen leaving that room after he enters it. Not on the camera, not by any eyewitnesses on the floor, none of the floor nurses or security. No one sees Sergey leave this room. Yet the following morning, when they go into the room to get him, he's gone. Absolutely vanished. Upon inspection of the room, there's only one window that is covered in steel bars. They're still in place. There's no evidence in that room whatsoever that he was able to escape that room in any way outside of leaving that front door. And there's no evidence on a security camera or by any witnesses that he ever left the room. And yet, he was gone. So now, the police in Kiev have a missing person that they have to find. So using the photographs and the information that they had on Sergei, they go and start looking at public records from the Soviet Union era. And what do they find? They verified that there was a man by the name of Sergei Valentinovich Ponomarenko from Kiev. What's really weird is the reports show that he was missing. Now, the date that they have on the official declared missing report was from 1960. They're not saying that's when he was actually missing. That's just when he was declared a missing person. Based on the evidence that they were able to find through their research and with the photographs, they were able to track down Sergei's fiancée. Her name was Valentina Krish. And they went to go see what information they could provide on Sergei, if maybe she had seen him, is he missing, that he was missing, and to see if they could, she could offer any information. When they get to her home and they knock on the door, Valentino answers the door. She is a woman in her 70s. And she had told them that, yes, Sergei was a real person, and that he was her fiancé, and that he ended up disappearing in 1958. Now, she said eventually, a few days after he had disappeared in 1958, he came back. And what's interesting is he was able to tell the people in the 1950s what the future looked like. He was even on a television show telling the viewers what he saw. He said that in the future the people would have cell phones. And Valentina even showed the police officers a photo that he had taken of Kiev in 2050. And the landscape of Kiev had buildings and skyscrapers in it that did not exist even in 2006. Also, she had a picture of Sergei that he had given her when he had came back, of himself in 2050 as an older man. Now, you can imagine how unbelievably confused the police are right now. What's even more stunning is when they asked if she knew where he was or if there was a way they can get in touch with him, she said the last time she saw her fiance was in 1970, where he disappeared again, just vanished, and he's never returned. How fascinating is this story? Now, there are people out there, I want to make sure we cover all the content, that have claimed that they've debunked this story. Number one is the ID that was used, that he presented the police, had that stamp on it from the Soviet Union. And they said that it was slightly smeared, which would somehow indicate that the type of ink that was used wasn't the legitimate ink that was used by the Soviet Union, that it was made in a way, it was done in a way where it wouldn't have smeared. They indicated that the pictures of Kiev from 2050 appeared to be doctored. They indicated that some of those buildings kind of looked like the Empire State Building, and that looking at the buildings, it appeared that the same picture was used repeatedly in the film editing to make Kiev look like a completely different city. And while I can understand some of these things, and chances are it was an elaborate hoax, because the probability of the fact that Sergei actually traveled from 1958 to 2006 is highly improbable. I haven't seen this evidence myself. Like, I haven't physically held it in my hand. I haven't seen his ID. I haven't seen the pictures. I haven't talked to Sergei myself. But just based on the evidence that were offered by the police of Kiev, the evidence that was offered by the doctor in his interrogation or examination of Sergei, the photographic evidence that the photo developer was able to produce, the expert testimony of this antique photography expert, who stated that the film that he used would be impossible to use by today's standards. It would not be feasible to use that film. It would be too degraded. He couldn't explain how the film that was in this camera from the 1950s was in perfect condition, and how he was able to develop the pictures. And the pictures were exactly everything that Sergei said. The fiancée actually existed as a 70-year-old woman, and she confirmed that Sergei was a real person, was her fiancé, did disappear in 1958, and then again disappeared in the 1970s, produced evidence to her that she showed the police of Kiev in 2050, a picture of him as an older man. I don't even know what to think about it. I can tell you that personally, this is a fascinating story of time travel. It is incredible. And the thing about it is, when you look at it from the standpoint of extraterrestrial, higher intelligence beings, higher sophistication, more technology beings that have been reported all over the world for decades and decades and decades, there has been many instances of loss of time. 2 or 3 hours, a day of time lost. To the person that was abducted or had this experience, it seemed like minutes. But in actual, it was hours. It was days. There have been truck drivers who've been on the road, who have driven the same routes 100 times, who have all had experiences of driving through towns that they're very familiar with, that they've been in 1,000 times, but late at night, all of a sudden they drive through this town and it looks completely different. It looks like a town from the 1950s or the 1960s. It looks completely different. It's the same town, but nothing is as they remember it. And then they leave and they come back and the town's back as it was. It was like a time slip. These things have been recorded by people all over the world. These slips in time. This quick, shot of a town from the 1950s today. There's a couple of famous time traveler stories of a young lady who returned to her hometown that she grew up in after being away for several decades. And she visited her town and everything was completely different than she remembered it. Same town. She found her elementary school. She found her high school. But none of the houses were as she remembered them. The housing numbers were right. The street names were right. But the houses were completely different. The downtown area was completely different. She left. She panicked. She was afraid. She didn't know what was going on. But then she eventually came back just a few weeks later, just because she was so confused. She had to convince herself that that didn't happen. And when she went back to her town the second time, everything was back as she remembered it. It was like a time slip. Is that what happened to Sergei? Did he slip through time? Was this craft responsible? I don't know. But it's a fascinating story. And this story has been picked up by the History Channel, tons of other paranormal type podcasts and documentaries. It's a highly publicized, highly documented example of a possible time traveler or a slip in time. So understanding that Einstein has proven, theoretically, in science, it's possible. If there are other advanced civilizations that are even thousands of years more advanced than us in technology, then how is it not possible that maybe they have actually figured out a way to not only travel through time as a matter of convenience to cover great distances in short periods of time, or to travel in between dimensions, or parallel universes, or parallel worlds, which have also been scientifically proven through quantum physics to exist. Dimensions have been proven to exist. Is it plausible? I think it's plausible. I mean, we don't know. We can't prove that it exists, but we sure as hell can't prove it doesn't either. So, what are your thoughts? Comment below. Do you think time travel is possible? What do you think about this story? And if you could travel back in time, where would you go? What time period would you go? What historical figures would you want to see? Or a historical event would you want to see? I have too many to list. It would be impossible for me to narrow it down. But I would really love to know what your thoughts are. So, if you could travel back in time, where would you go? Do you believe that time travel or slips in time are possible? Do you think that aliens maybe have something to do with it? I would love to know what your thoughts are on this. I found this story absolutely fascinating. And what do you think about the story? Do you find it as fascinating as I do? Let me know what you think below in the comments, guys. Let's see some comments. Let's see some activity. I want to get your feedback. Tell me what your thoughts are. And with that being said, guys, this is ScareRookie. Once again, thanking you for joining me today on Discussion Topic Tuesday. Thank you so much for being a member of this group. I truly appreciate each and every one of you and for everything that you do. You know, I really do appreciate it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that being said, guys, say it with me. This is ScareRookie signing off, and keep on scaring.